Imagine this. You're exactly where you are right now, but the rules of the world just changed. No signal, no backup, and no room for second guessing. When a normal day turns into a fight for your life, the clock starts ticking before you even realize that you're in danger. It isn't about who's the strongest or who has the most gear. It's about who can adapt before the environment takes control. Today, we're breaking down the reality of being thrown into the deep end and exactly what it takes to make it back out. So join me as we look at the top 5 survival horror movies on this episode of Ranking Rumble. Welcome back to WWH. My name is Andrew Dreamer. Survival horror can really mean a lot of different things. You could include films like The Descent, The Mist, The Ritual, The Thing. Hell, even Jaws could be considered a survival horror. But for me, when I think of survival horror, I think of something slightly different. I think of movies where the characters are trapped in a particular location or area. Movies where it becomes just as much about the elements and the ability to adapt as it is battling a threat. Though now that I say that, I realize that The Thing fits into those parameters as well, but this is my list. If you've been around here for any amount of time, you know how much I love The Thing, but it would be too easy of a choice and it would easily be number 1, so I'm still leaving it off. Again, one of my favorite movies of all time. Don't take the exclusion as hate. Moving on now. I found myself being more and more drawn into survival horror in the last couple years, and I think that's probably because there are a lot of good ones on Shudder, and I like perusing that selection. Something else I've found is that a lot of these movies on Shudder have the wildest endings, and I love that. Enough of that tangent though. To me, the purpose of survival horror is to create a heightened sense of vulnerability and tension through environmental factors. They're supposed to make you wonder what you would do in that situation, assess the risks, create a plan, and then see how it all plays out by the end. Do you think you could do better? Was your plan better? Who knows? We'll have to find out. Before we get into the thick of things here, be sure to body slam that subscribe button and drop kick that like button as hard as you can so you never miss out on any of the hard-hitting, chill-inducing 5-star matches we have here at WWH. But it is bell time though, so grab your popcorn and make your way to your seat. Let's head down to the ring. Starting us off at number 5 is Backcountry, released in 2014. Backcountry is a stripped-down, brutally realistic take on survival horror that leans heavily into the unpredictability of nature rather than supernatural threats. Directed by Adam McDonald, the film follows a young couple, Jen and Alex, who venture deep into a remote Canadian wilderness for what's supposed to be a peaceful camping trip. Alex, eager to impress and reconnect with nature, insists he knows the area well enough to go without a map. That overconfidence becomes the film's first quiet warning sign. As the couple hikes deeper into the forest, subtle tension begins to build. They encounter a strange, off-putting man who warns them about the dangers of the area, particularly the presence of black bears. From there, the film slowly shifts from a relationship drama into something far more unsettling. Once they realize they're lost, the environment itself becomes the antagonist. Endless trees, disorienting terrain, dwindling supplies, and the creeping realization that no help is coming. The horror isn't immediate, it seeps in gradually, creating a suffocating sense of dread. What makes Backcountry stand out as a survival horror movie is how grounded it feels. There's no exaggerated tension or last-minute miracle escapes. Every decision has consequences. The film emphasizes how fragile humans are when stripped of modern conveniences. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear start to erode the couple's ability to think clearly, which is where the real horror begins. It's not just about surviving the wilderness. It's about surviving your own mistakes. Then, of course, comes the film's most infamous element, the bear attack. Unlike typical horror movie creature scenes, this moment is presented with a shocking realism. It's sudden, chaotic, and deeply uncomfortable to watch. Not because it's stylized, because it feels so damn real. There's no dramatic music cue to prepare you, no heroic fight back, just raw, primal violence that reinforces the film's core theme. In the wild, humans are not at the top of the food chain. Ultimately, Backcountry thrives on its minimalism. It doesn't rely on jump scares or elaborate set pieces. Instead, it builds terror through isolation, poor decision making, and the indifferent brutality of nature. The wilderness isn't evil, it simply exists, and that's what makes it so terrifying. The film leaves you with a lingering sense that survival isn't about strength or bravery, but about preparation, humility, and a bit of luck. Qualities that these characters tragically lack when it matters the most. Next up at number 4, we have Buried, released in 2010. This is one of the most suffocating examples of survival horror ever put to screen, largely because of how little it gives you both visually and narratively. Directed by Rodrigo Cortez, the film centers entirely on Paul Conroy, an American truck driver working in Iraq who awakens buried alive in a wooden coffin with only a lighter, a cell phone, and very little else. That's the entire premise, and remarkably, it never leaves that confined space. The plot unfolds in real time as Paul tries to piece together what happened and figure out how to escape. Through a series of increasingly desperate phone calls to his employer, government officials, and his family, he learns he's been taken hostage and left underground while his captors demand a ransom. What makes the film so effective is how it transforms something as simple as a phone call into a lifeline. Every dropped signal, every dead battery warning, and every unhelpful response from the outside world becomes a source of morning dread. As survival horror, Buried thrives on pure psychological pressure rather than physical confrontation. There's no monster, no visible antagonist, just time, oxygen, and the crushing weight of being trapped. The coffin itself becomes the ultimate horror setting, tight, dark, and inescapable. The film constantly reminds you of Paul's vulnerability through small but terrifying details. The sand slowly seeping in, the lighter flickering out, the phone battery draining minute by minute. It's a race against suffocation, panic, and hopelessness, making survival feel less like a possibility and more like a fleeting illusion. A huge part of why the film works is the performance by Ryan Reynolds. Known primarily for charismatic and comedic roles, Reynolds delivers a raw, emotionally exhausting performance here. He is the only character we ever actually see on screen, and he carries the entire film on his own. There's no one to bounce off physically, just voices on the other end of the phone, yet he manages to convey fear, frustration, anger, and desperation with incredible authenticity. His performance makes the situation feel painfully real, grounding the film's premise in something deeply human. What makes Buried especially unsettling as a survival horror story is its refusal to provide comfort. Being buried alive is a fear that many people share, and this film forces you to sit with that discomfort, to feel every second of Paul's panic and isolation. By the end, it's less about whether he can escape and more about how long he can endure. That relentless focus on confinement, time, and human fragility is what elevates Buried from a simple thriller into something far more haunting. Coming in at number 3 is Alone, released in 2020. Alone is another stripped-down, intensely focused survival horror film that thrives on simplicity and raw tension. The story follows Jessica, a recently widowed woman who sets out on a solitary road trip through the Pacific Northwest, hoping to leave behind the trauma of her husband's death. Early on, her journey takes a dark turn when she encounters a strange man whose behavior becomes increasingly unsettling. What begins as an uncomfortable roadside interaction escalates into outright terror when he abducts her and imprisons her in a remote cabin. Jessica manages to escape though, but that moment of freedom only marks the beginning of the film's true ordeal. Fleeing into the wilderness, she finds herself haunted by her captor in a relentless game of cat and mouse. She's injured, exhausted, and completely isolated, but she has to navigate dense forest, rushing rivers, and harsh terrain, all while trying to stay one step ahead of a man who is determined to recapture and kill her. The plot is deceptively simple, but that simplicity is what allows the film to lean fully into that survival horror. Every decision Jessica makes carries immediate life or death consequences. What makes Alone particularly effective is its emphasis on isolation. There are long stretches of the film with minimal dialogue, forcing the viewer to sit with Jessica's fear and vulnerability. The wilderness itself becomes an antagonist. Uneven ground causes injuries, rivers threaten to sweep her away, and the vast emptiness reinforces how completely cut off she is from help. This environment amplifies the horror, turning even basic survival tasks like finding shelter, staying quiet, or simply moving forward into nerve-wracking challenges. Another key element is the grounded, realistic threat. The danger here is entirely human and natural, which makes it feel that much more immediate and plausible. The antagonist is not a monster, but just an ordinary looking man, which adds to the unease. His calm demeanor contrasts sharply with his brutality. This realism keeps the tension consistently high as the film avoids exaggerated action in favor of believable and desperate struggles for survival. Finally, Alone embodies survival horror through its focus on resilience as well as transformation. Jessica begins the film emotionally broken and vulnerable, but as she is pushed to her limits, she adapts, becoming resourceful and fiercely determined to live. In that sense, the horror isn't just about being hunted. It's about enduring, adapting, and ultimately fighting back when escape is no longer enough. Things that are inherently scary to a lot of people in the world. Our number 2 entrant today is Downrange, released in 2017. Directed by Ryuhei Kitamura, Downrange is a fairly basic but also brutal survival horror film that thrives on simplicity. A group of college students on a road trip suffers a sudden tire blowout on a remote stretch of highway. At first, it seems like bad luck, until they realize the tire was deliberately shot out. What follows is a relentless siege scenario as an unseen sniper pins them down in the open, turning a mundane roadside inconvenience into a nightmare with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide except behind the broken down vehicle. But what makes Downrange work as survival horror is its commitment to the vulnerability as well as the exposure. Unlike many horror films where characters can barricade themselves or escape into darkness, this film traps its characters in a wide open environment. The long stretch of empty road becomes its own kind of cage. Every movement is dangerous, every decision potentially fatal. The sniper's distance and invisibility amplify that tension. There's no monster to confront directly, no clear way to fight back. The horror comes from the randomness of violence and the helplessness of being watched through a scope where survival depends on timing, luck, and nerve. The film also leans heavily into the physicality of survival. Injuries are sudden and often graphic, reinforcing the idea that death can come instantly and without warning. There's very little sentimentality here. Characters are picked off quickly, sometimes before they're even fully established. That unpredictability is key to the film's survival horror identity. It denies the audience the comfort of knowing who might make it out alive. Instead, it creates a bleak atmosphere where survival feels more like a temporary delay than a guaranteed outcome. At the same time, it's fair to say that Downrange isn't a particularly polished or universally acclaimed film. The characters aren't deeply developed, and some of the dialogue can feel thin, but that almost works in its favor if you're drawn to the raw situational tension. The environment, the empty road, the broken down car, and the endless line of sight, it's the real star. It creates a minimalist stage for chaos where the concept carries more weight than the individual personalities. And then there's the ending, which pushes the film into something even more unsettling. Without spoiling specifics, it takes a turn that reinforces the senselessness of the violence and strips away any lingering sense of justice or closure. It's abrupt, a little wild, and arguably divisive, but it sticks with you. That final note perfectly encapsulates why Downrange can be so enjoyable despite its flaws. It commits fully to its premise and refuses to offer easy answers, leaving you with a pretty damn strong sense of unease long after that road goes quiet. Our number one entrant today is Frozen, released in 2010. Frozen takes a simple, almost everyday fear and stretches it into a brutal endurance test. Written and directed by Adam Green, the film follows three friends, Dan, Joe, and Parker, who convince a ski resort employee to let them take one last run before closing. A miscommunication leads to the resort shutting down for the week while they're still on that chairlift, leaving them stranded high above the frozen ground with no hope for rescue. What begins as an inconvenience quickly spirals into a desperate fight for survival as night falls, temperatures plummet, and the reality of the situation sets in. The cold becomes the primary antagonist, slowly numbing their bodies and impairing their judgment. Frostbite, dehydration, and exhaustion are portrayed in a way that feels uncomfortably plausible. The film forces you to sit with the characters as they weigh impossible choices, stay put and risk freezing death, or attempt a dangerous escape that could be just as fatal. That tension between inaction and action drives much of the horror. The environment plays a huge role in amplifying that fear. Suspended dozens of feet in the air, the characters are completely exposed to the elements, with no shelter and no way to signal for help. The vast empty ski slopes that would normally feel open and freeing instead become isolating and hostile. And then there's the added threat lurking below. Wolves circling in the darkness, turning the ground itself into another danger. It's a reminder that even if they manage to get down, they're not necessarily safe. Part of what makes the premise hit so hard is just how relatable it is. Anyone who's ever been on a ski lift has probably had that fleeting thought. What if this thing just stopped and I got stuck up here? Frozen takes that passing anxiety and refuses to let it go. It lingers on that helplessness of being suspended in midair, unable to control your situation, watching the world go quiet around you. The film taps into that universal unease and then pushes it to its absolute limit. It's also worth noting that Frozen doesn't glamorize survival. Every decision comes with consequences, and the film isn't afraid to show how quickly things can go wrong. Injuries are severe, panic leads to mistakes, and hope fades in a way that feels grounded rather than cinematic. That harsh realism is what gives the film staying power. It's not just scary in the moment, it's the kind of scenario that sticks with you long after, especially the next time you find yourself riding a chairlift and glancing down a little more nervously than usual. But there you have it. Those are the top 5 survival horror movies of all time, according to me. What do you think of my list? Did I leave anything off? Let me know in the comments below, and I'd also like to know what you would do if you were in any of these situations. I think it would be interesting to see the different plans for survival that we can come up with. Let's have those conversations and have some fun with it as well. And also, I just want to say I really appreciate you all for joining me here today. It truly means the world to me. Now that we've talked about some great survival horror movies, what are the best possession movies of all time? Luckily, you can find out by clicking the video that's appearing on your screen now. And remember, in the squared circle of horror, there are no countouts for nightmares. My name is Andrew Dreamer, and this is Wrestling with Horror.